Good morning, everyone. I thought this comic was apropos to start our show today.
I'm Chuck Black, and this is the Age of Ingenuity, our weekly chronicle of Canada's current innovation economy. And frankly, it's hard to tell what's happening these days. To learn more, we're interviewing Mark Paravolos, the host of the daily Can Poly vidcast on YouTube. He's a journalist too. Maybe between the three of us, we'll figure out what's going on.
And I'm Alan Calder, and we've also compiled a list of alternative news and commentary sites that legacy media does not want you to know about. We'll be noting them from here, plus posting their links and RSS feeds on our website to create a one-stop shopping site for Canadian news untainted by Canadian government censorship and funding constraints.
So visit us now, visit us often, but also remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe to support this vidcast on Patreon and on PayPal. And with that said and done, here are the stories we're currently tracking. And our first story tonight is the October 12th, 2020 Rebel News Post. CBC released a trusted sources list of media outlets that take bailout bucks, of course. This is on YouTube. And in this piece, Rebel News argues that the CBC story on trusted news sources was, one, actually scooped from a lobby group building a list of government-funded news outlets, and two, it argues that the trusted news sources are by definition government-funded, and other smaller media outlets that don't take government funds are by definition less trustworthy. Also goes on to say that a lot of CBC stories were actually scooped from Rebel News, without attribution, by the way. And then it goes on to talk a little bit about the recent history of government funding for media in Canada, not just the CBC, but Post Media and CTV. And most of the major news organizations in Canada take an awful lot of money. And that began just a couple of years back, at least according to the May 22nd, 2020 Government of Canada post on the Canadian Heritage News website, which talks about the initial $50 million over 5 years was in budget 2018. And it was to allow Canadians living in underserved communities to continue to have access to media coverage on topics of public interest that affect them. And over the next year or so, it blew up into a $600 million media fund that went out to most of the major players in Canada. Didn't seem to affect local coverage. For example, CBC canceled its local coverage as outlined in the March 18th, 2020 CBC News post. CBC temporarily replaces local news amid coronavirus pandemic. And that was back in March of this year. As of today, the local coverage hasn't been reinstated. But CBC kept the money, primarily because CBC viewership was really low in most markets. And then in 2019 and 2020, at least according to the September 10th, 2019 CTV News post, Canada's $600 million media bailout, a guide to federal tax breaks for the new industry. Canada kicked in more money. The first $600 million was last year. Another $600 million came this year. And it's getting so bad that the Western Standard, it's a publication out of Alberta, which doesn't receive federal government bailout money. It argued that Trudeau bought the media in their October 10th, 2020 Western Standard post. How Trudeau bought the media. And they argue that it's not just the money, it's the regulation, it's the licensing requirements. And you put all those things together, Trudeau has managed to bring nearly the entire Canadian media under government supervision. So what do you think of that, Al?
I think those sort of regulations, etc., if they're too expensive, become very prohibitive, and it's easy way to control people then.
I don't think it's just an easy way to control people. I think that my direct competitors and your direct competitors have been given hundreds of millions of dollars to compete against us. And what are we doing? We're working off a budget of $100 a month.
I wouldn't. I don't consider those direct competitors of ours either. To be fair, like the truth is, they're not. They have the reach and the funding. They have satellites. We don't. You know what I mean? Like they have so many advantages over us that we couldn't possibly compete with them in any way, shape, or form. Realistically, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I would say that we belong in a certain tier of media coverage. We belong maybe with the Western Standard, maybe a little below the Western Standard, maybe with Canada Land, maybe we're not Rebel Media yet. We don't have the payroll Rebel Media has. We're not True North. Those are other competitors.
Sure shit, not CBC or CTV.
No, we're not. But we're following along the same path as Blacklock's Reporter. We're following along the same path as the Post Millennial. Ken Pauley, whose host will be interviewing a little later on, we're following along the same path he is following, and we're following along with a couple of others operating on the fringes of polite Ottawa society. And you know, the media ecosystem is that the people at the top of the ecosystem steal from the people a little bit further down. CBC steals from Rebel. Rebel steals from the blogs, the high-level blogs, the Blacklock Reporters, the Post-Millennials, and those places tend to steal from small, low-level blogs like us. And that brings me to our second post. Trust Me, I'm Lying, Confessions of a Media Manipulator. That's a 2013 book written by Ryan Holiday. You like that book. I gave you a copy of the book.
I was about to say, Chuck, this is one of my favorite books, though, for real.
Yeah.
This one really, it's almost as if they should make people read this in school to teach them about how the world might work.
Yeah. The book talks explicitly about why blogs and local news outlets matter. News sources like ours, news sources like Ken Pauley, news sources that deal with the nitty gritty of life. And it talks about how they drive the news, how they can be manipulated even. I mean, if somebody gave us $1,000, they'd be our friend for at least a month, and we'd essentially publish whatever they wanted.
Yeah, $1,000 that'll get you from dinner to breakfast. On my
book. that will. But the idea is that blogs drive the news. The people further up the food chain very often steal stories from blogs. The major mass media, they steal stories from the mid-level news outlets.
I also just check as well, if I might jump in here, is that the fact of this COVID thing preventing reporters from mainstream media going out in the streets makes blogs like us more important, because we're doing actual reporting on the street, so they can take real news from us.
I would say that's true. We've been doing a lot of coverage of the anti-lockdown protests, the freedom protests every weekend.
The videos, pictures of the actual people doing actual protesting, etc. Even though they could have taken them from their offices, that they're not on the street there doing anything.
Yeah, I know. You think they could go to the window at CBC headquarters overlooking Dundas Square and take a couple of pictures?
It's a bit insulting. When they have these like ridiculously low counts, like they could have seen more from their offices. Never mind. That's just
and the second part of the book, Trust Me, I'm Lying, talks about how this sort of media ecosystem can really mess up, how it can backfire, and the consequences to the current media system. And I think that some of the consequences in the book are coming out now. We just talked about a few of them. Reporters for CTV, reporters for CBC don't generally go to protests to actually interview people anymore. They wait for other people to shoot some footage, and then they sit in their basement offices and they write whatever comes to mind. They have no context over what's actually going on.
No, I agree with that too. They just don't get it though, and that's why at the protests people are screaming "CBC sucks" sometimes, because they're so sick of the shitty coverage.
Yeah, well, even Rebel News, they accused multiple times, and they gave several explicit examples of CBC stealing quite a few of their stories. And this is the logical progression if the thesis, and trust me, I'm lying, is accurate, because Rebel News is kind of a mid-tier news provider, and the top tier will steal stories from them. Won't attribute it, but it'll save CBC a lot of time actually looking for content on its own.
And theoretically, the taxpayers of Canada as well, relying on the people from Rebel Media to do the heavy lifting.
What does CBC get? $1.5 billion, $2 billion a year?
Where's Don Cherry? I want my Don Cherry back then for that kind of money.
Yeah, but they don't get hardly any coverage at all. When I was a kid, there was a platitude in the media industry. CBC, no matter what it did, just so long as it followed the pattern of CBC before, would always get 20% of the audience in radio or on television, just by being a useful information system.
And what else was there, right?
Yeah.
Realistically.
Well, it's totally lost. I would also argue that the media ecosystem also includes funding, that sort of thing. And I think the current funding models for mid-level, low-level media is broken. And for that, I referenced the February 29th, 2020 Vote archive post, The Death of Yuppie Journalism, which discusses the casino atmosphere propelling online journalism organizations. And these organizations essentially buy viewers artificially using venture capital. They go out, they raise a couple $1 million. They buy automated click-throughs. They buy viewers. They buy listicles. Have you ever clicked on a listicle? 25 ways to save money, or the 25 hottest women in the world. Those are listicles, and every time you click through one of those, you're not just listed as one viewer. You're listed as somebody who's clicked 25 times. You're listed as 25 different click-throughs, maybe even 25 different viewers. And those listicles are sold to news outlets and aggregated into their viewing numbers. So something like Vox or something, a competitor which focuses primarily online, may only get 2,000 or 3,000 views a month on their website, but they buy views from other organizations that sell the views, so they can say they're 50 or 100 or 200,000. And that's part of the reason why many of these organizations, when they run out of venture capital money, they crash and burn. And that's why there's been so many layoffs over the last year or so. The first generation of venture capital funded media outlets have essentially gone bankrupt. I'm speaking with Mark Paravolos. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Am I close?
Close enough. For all of us.
He is the host of the daily Can Poly YouTube vidcast. Mm-hmm. And Mark, I know we're recording this at 8 p.m. on Tuesday night. It's dark outside, but I just can't help myself, man. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning. Good morning. Nice to see you. Well, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. It's always nice to do interviews like this, because it breaks the usual pattern that I'm usually in. And I like what I do, but it's nice to talk with people.
That's fair. You are a habit for me. You are essential viewing for the Canadian political class, at least the conservative half that voted for Maxime Bernier last time. I suppose that's a smaller subset. But how did that happen for you?
Well, I started mainly looking in Ontario. I started as an Ontario poly, looking at Ontario politics, because I think that fundamentally humans are story creatures, and we look at things through a story lens. And the cast of characters at Queen's Park, Doug Ford and that group of people, and at the time still the leader of the NDP, what's her name? Not Lee. Horvath. Thank you. I haven't looked at Ontario politics that much. I'm like, oh, who's she? Horvath doing the cast of characters was funny. And the longer I did Ontario poly, and I got into Ontario poly because they were talking about sanctuary cities, and they said, oh, it doesn't mean anything. Sanctuary province doesn't mean anything. And I was like, it does. It means something. So I wanted to talk about that. And then I thought, looking at the federal politics, this cast of characters is hilarious, and they do hilarious things all the time, like just crazy things come up. And I thought, like, I watched Stephen Colbert, I watched The Daily Show, and I thought those guys were like the edge of satire. It was a bleeding edge of hilarious satire that really was you had to be smart. Like, you had to be this tall to ride that ride and understand what was going on. And that look at politics, I wish somebody was doing it in Canada. And I listened around for a political podcast that was not even close to that, just looking at news and not trying to shove something down my throat that I didn't want to buy, right? And I couldn't find that podcast. There was people that were really dry. And there were people that I thought had some potential. And ultimately nothing scratched that itch. I was like, I'm just not interested. I just don't care. Like, it's not, you're not talking about it in a way that makes me go like, yeah, I can't wait to listen to the next show. And really, I think it's about characters, and it's less about the news, but it is about the news. It's about what those characters are doing in play at the macro level. Like, this is how it matters to all of us, but also at the micro level. Like, can you believe that Trudeau did X, Y, Z? Like, a throat tickle? Come on. Like, it's so crazy, right? And dog eating Catherine McKenna. Like, we've got ministers, blackface Justin Trudeau. If this was Stephen Harper, we would still not have heard the end of the first blackface episode, never mind the rest of it. But it's not. It's Justin Trudeau. And that's okay if you're liberal, right? So the cast of characters is so funny. And the craziness, I mean, when I started, I was just talking with a friend of mine. We go for burritos and we talk politics, and it's my favorite burrito place in Guelph, and I really love them. They're really great. And we always go in and we just chat for like an hour about politics. And so that was kind of like the synergy as well of the show, like, because talking about politics and stuff.
Yeah.
Sorry, I lost my thread, but carry on.
That's okay. I was going to say, to be fair, you do more than just talk about politics. You actually ran for office in 2019.
Yes, that was fun.
How did that work out for you?
I didn't win. I didn't win. You have to have a reason to do things, and running in Guelph is not easy, right? As a conservative, it's not easy. Guelph did elect a conservative. I believe it was an MPP and an MP at different times in our history. So it's not an exclusively liberal riding, but it's a tough riding for a conservative, I think. All of that said, you have to have a motivation to do something. You have to not believe in something, but like, you have to do something like that for a reason, not just to be bludgeoned by bad media and bad press and being called names and all that other stuff. It's quite masochistic if you look at it from that lens. But the reason that I ran wasn't necessarily to win the seat. I would have liked to win the seat. But the reason I ran was to get Bernier in the debates, right? Like, to make sure that there was enough people in the riding. And I don't think I could have sat by and watched somebody else take on this riding as a candidate, because I thought, who's going to articulate it better than me? And maybe that's arrogant. I don't know. But I haven't seen anybody like put together arguments like I do all that often, and especially in my small circle in Guelph here, right? And especially arguing specifically this. So I thought, coaching somebody through this is going to be more difficult than me just doing it. Like, I just might as well do it. So my motivation worked, but I thought ultimately after the debate that it was a washing machine. They stacked it against Bernier anyway, and I think that in a fair debate talking about ideas, Bernier would have done better, and maybe the party would have resonated a little bit more.
I tend to agree. My understanding from Al is that you actually got banned from one of the debates.
You're in the local ones. They tried to ban me from all of the debates. Yeah,
they shut it down.
Yeah.
So they shut it down because of your supposedly racist policies they couldn't point to.
Yeah, there weren't any racist policies.
Wow.
there weren't any racist policies. And I mean, there were other things that they did. The University of Guelph invited all of the candidates, even the communist candidate, to come and speak to the poli-sci class, right? Except for me, because I'm the bad guy.
You were worse than the communist candidate?
Apparently, the communist candidate she didn't like me very much. And I mean, she had a hard time articulating it because, well, she was bad at articulating her arguments. but she would like get frustrated and flustered with me even being close to her, and like having a difference of opinion, like through a debate or something like you know, answering questions or whatever. She would get flustered and angry, and then frustrated that the audience didn't understand why she was angry, and it just made me laugh. I was like, oh, you can't even communicate your frustration. Like, it's funny. Like,
let me help you with this, right?
yeah. I'm sorry you're bad at this. Like,
I noticed that you're absolutely not bad at getting your viewpoint out. You're one of the nicest, most sociable people I've ever met at being a really harsh judge.
yeah, that's maybe true.
You're very harsh in many of the stories you profile and many of the people discussed. Why
it
are
can
you?
be.
He's done so many. To be fair, he's done so many stories too, though, right?
That's a lot of stories. Yeah, I've done over 1,000 videos, I think, at this point in time. It was 967 the last time I looked, and that was last month. So I've done a lot of videos, and not all of them are harsh, but I am looking at it through a lens of telling a story, and because I'm trying to tell a story, I do try and accentuate things. I do try and take a firm position one way or the other. And I do try and say, like, this is what I would expect somebody with this kind of responsibility to do. This is what I would expect if I were in that position. And I'm just a dude in my garage. Like, I'm not particularly smart or particularly special in any way, really. I'm just a guy from a small town in Ontario, really. Like, honestly, that's it. Yeah. And were I in charge of those things, if somehow they landed in my lap, this is how I do it. And I'm shocked most of the time because the people in those positions either haven't thought of that or purposely didn't do it that way, and didn't do it that way because accountability or whatever. And and then that plays into the rhetoric of the government of the day. We want to be accountable. We want to be, you know, transparent, blah, blah, blah. And when they say those things, then my expectations are even higher. So it's hard to say, okay, here's this hilarious cast of characters. Here's how they're consistently messing things up. And not be harsh, I guess.
So you have strong opinions about,
yeah,
I would call it the legacy media.
Yeah, it's a very difficult, I would love for our legacy media to be honest. And that's a really hard thing to put your finger on in 2020.
You don't think they're honest?
What's honest?
Yeah.
Not in the way that they cover the news, in the angles that they cover, when you dig into the news. I was talking about it today. There was an article that was stronger in the headline than the article's body was actually when you read it. And the problem is, so you have to agree with all of the government, like, so the government says there's going to be no return to normal until there's a vaccine. But we know about HCQ. We know that Trump hasn't had a vaccine and he's had COVID-19. We know that there's a high recovery rate. We know a lot of things that make this disease not in the class of don't leave your house. It's very, very scary. Right now, for a certain subset of the population, maybe there's an argument to be made. Sure, we should protect people from getting sick, from flu, from COVID-19, from everything, but we shouldn't shut down our economy for those things. And so when we've got the news coming at it from an angle of the vaccine is the only way to return to normal, when that's patently not true. We've got countless examples of that, from Sweden to states that have not seen second waves and all sorts of stuff. Yeah, I'm going to sit there and say that they're not being honest. And that's just one example. There are many others. Masking, global warming, like the nuance that they are, masking is the better one because you can see the science. There's 30 years of policy level science that drives the masking policies. 2015 had unions. There was a mandatory masking policy if you didn't get the flu shot in 2015 in Ontario. And the nurses union said, you can't do this. This is not legal. You cannot put mandatory masks on nurses, regardless of whether they got the flu shot, regardless of whether you think it cuts down on the instances of flu. Here's expert people, 30 years of policy science that says it doesn't. And they won. They said, no masks, you can't do this. They won, and they won twice, not just once, they won twice. So yeah, when the news is looking at it and they only show a little tiny bit, white supremacy is the biggest problem in Canada these days? Really? Really? Yeah, they're lying.
I tend to agree, but some of those things you say would get you and me kicked off YouTube.
Yeah, potentially.
Do you think the federal government, they've indicated that they want to start restricting small independent news outlets who don't
Very scary.
toe the line in favor of the large legacy media outlets who they pay money to already. What do you think about that?
Terrifying. It's very scary. It's very scary because they're trying to do an end run around. They tried to a little while ago license websites. They were trying to do the per link tax or whatever. And the backlash on that was just incredible, right? So I think they're trying to.
I was going to say I find that terribly frightening as a guy who cites lots of references.
Yep. So I think what they're trying to do is an end run around that. They're trying to do it in a way that people aren't going to respond strongly, and they're trying to frame it just the same way as they frame the racist argument. We need to protect you from this dangerous, scary speech, right? Like that's what they're going to do. It's the same argument they're making for COVID, right? Like this is so scary that we're going to shut down our economy to protect you. That's the fundamental argument. That's what it boils down to. And I call bullshit. Absolute bullshit. Even if the individual people in the decision-making panel have the best of intentions, I think that they're either not looking properly at the models, or they're not looking at the macro effects, the collateral damage.
They're obviously not modeling correctly. Every model I've seen relating to COVID says like millions of times more deaths than what actually occurs. When you look at the actual data, and God, I don't know. I think scientists know lots about science, but not very much about anything else. So they make decisions within a very narrow range. They can't look at the macro. You're right.
Well, and the problem is that, so we've got in Guelph, for example, or all the health units around Guelph and Ontario, each one's managed by their own doctor, right? And the doctor has carte blanche. They tell the public service, the elected officials what they want. The mayor, you should do this, the restaurants and all that. But they're not elected officials. The mayor and crew are, right? So we've got this kind of medical tyranny by dictate by this unelected bureaucrat, essentially, that's saying we need to lock down and blah, blah, blah. And they don't have experience with managing this many people in a lockdown. They don't have any experience managing an economy. They don't have experience crashing an economy on purpose for a flu, essentially. And I say again, protect those people who need protecting, sure. Come up with protocols that are going to not flood old folks' homes with COVID cases, but we need to get back to like real life. And you can't have unelected bureaucrats run the world, and because that shields the elected officials. Oh, I was just listening to the best advice we had, and I can't get a second opinion, right? Like Guelph can't go for a second opinion. We can't be like, you know what, the Kitchener guy is saying this, so we're going to go with that guy, okay? Like, and Tam has zero credibility. Like then
Tam's a nutcase. Tam is telling everybody how to have sex without touching anyone.
Yeah, well, glory holes. The masks work, or no, healthy people shouldn't wear masks. Borders, viruses don't know borders. Now borders are closed, masks are mandated. Like, it's the fact that she's still in that position, the fact that there's no scramble from this Liberal government. They're either doing what they want to do, they're executing their plan effectively, which I can't, if there's no scramble, right? If they're like, yep, things are good, like, right? Then I must assume that they're doing what they want with the plan. And I can't imagine how this person is still in their job, right? Like, and the Toronto stuff, I don't understand why there's not more outrage about the scrubbing of all that data. Like, we had a data chart very, very clear that showed we've had 3 deaths since August 3rd or something like that in Toronto. And
and it was updated, crazy. Modified, or lost. Or
well, as soon as, so Ezra Levent pointed out and sourced the link saying, here's like, basically, is this worth shutting things down? And he sourced it. And I was like, how does he know? Where's it listed? Is it that easy? And I couldn't believe it. I was like scrolling. I was like, are you kidding me? It's this obvious, and we're locking down for this? It doesn't make sense to me. Like, and that's part of it. I think you asked at the beginning, how is it that people who are interested in politics, and not everybody's interested in politics, and that's okay, come and watch me. And I think that I understand that not everybody's interested in this, but I'm coming from the point of, I am interested in this, and I think this is nuts, and I just want to answer questions. I just have these crazy questions that I think are reasonable questions, and those questions lead me to open tabs and try and find the answers. And when I get to the end of my tabs and the end of my answers, usually that makes a compelling show. Usually it's like, this is what I found. And really, ultimately, can you believe this?
I think that's fair comment. I think it's part of your charm, just your enthusiasm for going through the process and the way you smile when you come up with a real answer.
Yeah, well, I do like to have a satisfactory answer, and even if I'm wrong, like I'm cool with being wrong. I'm cool with putting out a theory and having that theory disproven. I'll pin it in the comments. I'll be like, I was wrong. Like shit, I got that wrong, and that's okay. Like I'm a human person. Like I said, I'm just a dude in my garage. I do my best, and I think I put out a compelling show. I think I put out something that is worth watching. Sometimes I watch my show back just to make sure I don't say anything that's, if I cover a controversial topic, sometimes you put your foot in your mouth, right? And I don't think it's happened where I've had to like take down a show. I've had to explain what I mean, but I don't think it's happened where I've had to like take things down. I usually catch it and I'll rework what I mean to say and be clear about it. But I rewatch my show, and most of the time I'm like, I'm entertained. I'm like, I'd watch this. So I don't know, maybe that's narcissistic too. I don't know, but I try and cover it in a way that's compelling, and I think it's compelling. So I hope other people think it's compelling.
And those are the stories we're covering this week. As always, the articles we've referenced are listed in the show notes.
Next week, we'll be at the October 17th, 2020 Freedom Protest at Dundas Square in Toronto, Ontario. Please join us. And if you can't make it to Toronto, attend one of the other protests currently scheduled across the country. While there, say hello to alternative media outlets who happen to be there reporting on the news. After all, someone's got to be there. The legacy media no longer is. And a partial list of those upcoming protests is online at hugsovermass.ca/events. And if you'd like to promote your event or your activity, or if you think you have insight into Canada's current innovation economy, then send me an email. I'm at chuck.black@protonmail.com.
And we're currently on YouTube and BitChute, and hope to be on other platforms soon. Remember to like, subscribe, and share or comment on our posts. Even better, if you like the content we create, send some money to our Patreon and PayPal accounts. We couldn't do this without you, and we really appreciate your patronage.
And that's all for this week. We'll be back next week with more stories covering our current age of ingenuity.